What's going on, Hoops Freaks out there? My name is Justin Fensterman, and I am Fensty. This is Hoops Freak Fensty, talking about the amazing time of the NBA, the National Basketball Association, the 1990s, what really catapulted the league to the next level when it came to everything from viewership to general interest on and off the court. The 1990s get a lot of that credit. Also visibility too, being able to see these athletes more than just on the court at different events, different concerts. You can combine pop culture with the NBA, and that is what I do every single episode, celebrating a great time to be a sports fan, which was the 1990s. Heading into a little bit of the 2000s right there, that's what made me a diehard NBA fan, a diehard sports fan, 90s NBA. Today, let's talk about one of my favorite topics of all time in sports to talk about, the Orlando Magic, the 1990s Orlando Magic teams. Shaq, Penny, 3D Dennis Scott, Nick Anderson, going to talk about it all and how you can really build through the draft. Even in today's games, you could even build through the draft and eventually become a powerhouse of a team. Speaking of powerhouses, I want to thank Adam Bernard for producing this great series. Every time I get to be with you and talk about why the 90s NBA is just so freaking cool, because of teams like these, because of jerseys like these that you get. The nice pinstripe right here, Orlando Magic. This was a Shaq jersey. In fact, when I wanted to start up a jersey collection, and I don't know what motivated me, I want to say about 10 years ago, I got motivated. I was watching a few documentaries, just looking at some of my old cards, and I said, these jerseys are just so awesome. And who inspired the jersey collection that I have now of over 30, at least 30? This was number one right here. This was the first of the jersey collection that I started, the pinstripe, black pinstripe Orlando Magic Shaquille O'Neal jersey. Anytime you saw this jersey with Shaq wearing it between 92 and 96, a sense of excitement, a sense of, wow, I'm watching one of the most dominant freaks of nature in sports right now. That feeling that you get a generational talent, that's exactly what you were watching right there. Or if you didn't like the black pinstripe, you could always go with the trusty blue Magic, the blue pinstripe. I got a blue pinstripe Penny Hardaway right here. What do you like better? Ultimately, black pinstripe, more my jam, but you can't really go wrong. How cool is this freaking jersey? Seriously. We don't even have to talk about the teams themselves. The jerseys, amazing, amazing marketing, uniqueness, really cool, really old school looking, but in the 90s still with the times, like with the star right here. These jerseys are awesome, and that's another reason why people flocked to this team. But let's not forget, unlike some of the other teams, the Boston Celtics, the New York Knicks, the Orlando Magic were an expansion team that grew and grew and grew very quickly. They appeared in 1989. That's when they first hit the scene. It was them and the Minnesota Timberwolves. And back then, it was the expansion draft where each team couldn't protect about 4 players or so. They could protect 8, they couldn't protect 4. And from those players that were deemed unprotected, that's who the Magic and the Minnesota Timberwolves got to choose between. The Orlando Magic choose Sidney Green, coming off the New York Knicks, try to get some size in there. Didn't really work out too well. But again, expansion team. They had other guys that they got in Reggie Theus and also Terry Catledge as well, who helped with the scoring, especially those first few years pre-Shaq for the Orlando Magic. Now, with the Orlando Magic being an expansion team, really without relying on savvy vets and having to build through the draft, who was that first ever draft pick for the Orlando Magic? Sharpshooter Nick Anderson. Coming out of Chicago, you went to U of I, Illinois, an incredible shooter, very disciplined, solid defender as well, very good at moving around with screens. That's what Nick Anderson did. And Nick Anderson, it took him a little bit to get going in that first year. But by the time 1990 came for the second season and they got Dennis Scott, now you've got two sharpshooters that play pretty good defense on the team that could start to catapult you ultimately offensively. In 1990, the NBA was still that old school half-court style play, not really run and gun. A few teams did it, like the Golden State Warriors run TMC teams. They did the Nelly Ball run and gun, but there were not many other teams that were doing just that. This Orlando Magic team did that. They helped usher in that. Why? Because it wasn't always like tradition, get to the basket, make your 5 passes, and get to the basket. This Orlando Magic team, coached by Matt Guokas at the time, they were down with shooting threes. They started to really usher in. Now we see it all the time, but before, we didn't really see that. It was really just trying to get it into the low block if you didn't have the open lane and try to push the ball inside, get closest to the basket. This team wanted to shoot threes. And so when you're looking at the Orlando Magic developing there, you now have 2 3-point shooting teams out there. Now, offensively and defensively, after the first couple of years, they weren't going anywhere, not just yet. And even going into the 92-93 season, this was a 21-win team. They needed more. They needed somebody else. And the problem back then is these expansion teams, which were often bad at the beginning, they didn't attract free agents. When it came to the money, it wasn't what it was now. And so players didn't want to go to these new teams that were building and building and building, and you didn't know if they were going to contend or not. That was the thing back then. So teams back then like the Magic, the Timberwolves, later on the Raptors, the Grizzlies, kind of stunted a little bit because of that, because they couldn't attract the sexy free agent or anything like that. However, 1992, what ends up happening, coming off of 21 wins, who is the prize that draft? There were actually 2, really. 2 big men, Shaquille O'Neal, LSU, Alonzo Mourning, Georgetown. Now the Magic were in range because of the lottery system back then. The Magic were in range to get Shaq, but they still had to win the lottery. Pat Williams, we've all seen the clip, him getting excited, former GM. I've interviewed him a ton. Very nice guy. Shocked as ever when Orlando was able to land the number 1 overall draft pick. Charlotte Hornets got number 2. You couldn't really miss if you were in the top 2. And this was still a big man's game. You had established centers in this league. Hakeem Olajuwon, David Robinson. You were getting the end of Robert Parrish, but he was pretty much at the end. Mark Eaton, pretty much at the end. Brad Daugherty was involved, but also kind of banged up a little bit. You had a lot of good centers there in the NBA already. But none of these guys had the body, had the speed and agility, had the overall skill and dominance factor that Shaquille O'Neal brought. And these are all Hall of Famers, champions. I mentioned Hakeem Olajuwon, an MVP. Shaq was just that dominant, and everybody knew it. There are some years where you don't really know who the hell is going to be the number 1 overall pick. There was no question right there. No question at all. Magic ended up taking Shaq, and then all of a sudden, between the 1991-92 season and the 92-93 season, they improved 20 games. By 20 games. That's getting a generational talent. That is the impact a generational talent like Shaq makes. And remember, for those that aren't used to watching 90s clips or didn't grow up in the 90s or weren't even close, and you only remember Shaq going back to even the Lakers, maybe some of you even going back to the Heat, which is not that long ago, if you really think about it. But before Lakers, Shaq, and Kobe, there was the Orlando Magic version of Shaq. He wasn't just a post-up player. No, he ran after the freaking ball. Hell, he ran the court with the ball. He had handles. This guy could go from baseline to baseline. The way he moved was absolutely incredible those first 4 years. Very different from when he went to the Lakers. Got a little bigger, really hung out in the post. Perfect game plan. That's fine. But for this team, and for this Magic team, You needed to be able to move, to be able to rely on three-point shooting and that stopping short on the break sometimes and popping. You need to be able to have a fast team. And in the 1992-1993 season, they were on the upper end when it came to pace. That's what it was with the Orlando Magic. You have to have to run the kind of offense that they wanted to run. You needed a high-octane offense, and if you had a decent enough defense, you were going to be a contender soon enough. They finished 500 as a defensive team. Their rating was top 12. That's what happens when you get a Shaquille O'Neal in there. It's not guys like Anthony Bowie that are helping out, John Concac, those guys. They're not going to do jack for you. But having a guy like Shaq stops the bleeding and causes teams to have to foul him. Foul trouble, easy lanes. You saw veteran players get out of his way. Get the hell out of his way. This rookie coming down full steam. You're going to take the hit, try to draw the charge. You'll be knocked till next Tuesday with this guy. That's how good Shaq was. And as someone who was 5 years old when Shaq came into this league, I'm sitting there watching basketball, eat my popcorn probably, because even still to this day, I'm always eating popcorn. And I'm sitting there going, whoa, this is absolutely incredible. Superman, that's exactly what he was. But there was more to Shaq than that. There was more to Shaq than his game on the court. It was how he was able to get fans attracted to him off the court. The personality, the goofy dancing. I know when you're an athlete, you have to be serious. You have to be an adult. You can't have any fun, right? You have to be an adult. Let's all be adults. Shaq said, screw that. I'm in my 20s. I'm having a good time. And I want people to be into basketball, and I want people to be into the Shaq brand. So before you know it, video games, movies, everything coming out that has Shaq in it, the Reebok shoes and everything. Marketing was becoming bigger than ever in the 1990s, and Shaq was a central nucleus of all of that. You can build whatever you want because he's one of the most recognizable players in sports. Orlando wins 41 games, a huge improvement. Problem was they missed the playoffs at 500, and they lost via tiebreaker to Indiana. So the only difference between 92 and 93 when it came to the draft lottery was that instead of having one of the top three chances essentially to get the number one overall pick via probability, they now have the lowest odds possible because of their record, because of where they finished compared to some of the other bottom feeders in the league. They end up having one ping pong ball in of, I believe, about 65, 66. One ping pong ball. And you knew immediately, because I watched this lottery again, you can find all these clips on YouTube. Great, by the way, documentary on the Orlando Magic from the ESPN 30 for 30 series. This Magic moment, one of my favorites of any of the 30 for 30s. They expand on the timeline that I'm talking about right now. You got to check that out. But Pat Williams, who's hanging out there once again trying to get lucky, he not only won 92's lottery, he actually won it in 1986 when he was with the Philadelphia 76ers. They end up trading the pick. I believe it was the Cleveland who got Brad Daugherty in that trade. That was actually the Len Bias drafted year where the Celtics magically had the second overall pick. Go figure right there. You got to love trades back then to try to capitalize. But 1993, they have one ping pong ball. That ping pong ball works its way all the way up, and they once again, you talk about magic, you talk about needing the most magical of moments right there. The Orlando Magic draw the number one overall pick. Once again. Now you're an expansion franchise. At this point, about what? 4 years old? 5 years old? And what can help your team grow further with one blue chip prospect? How about two blue chip prospects? So with that, as the draft was coming up, and now Orlando's like, holy hell, we now have the number one overall pick again. We were expected to be at 11 or 12. Now all of a sudden is, well, who are they going to take? Last year, they took the best player in the draft, Shaquille O'Neal in 92. Who were they going to take in 1993? So the thing with this is, what made it interesting was the best player coming out of the draft in 1993 from the Michigan Fab Five, Chris Webber. Now, Chris Webber plays a little bit of a different position than Shaq, a little bit smaller, but still very familiar styles of play, just really hammering the post. And they had that already. They needed somebody, and it's no disrespect to Scott Skiles. Great passer, an amazing passer, game-changing player, nope. Solid guard, an original on this team. Amazing assist guy, not an all-around game-changing guard. So Shaq, speaking of blue chips, on the set of the movie Blue Chips, pun intended, he actually gets to meet, because he plays in the movie with Penny Hardaway. And Penny Hardaway was able to feed him passes, and Shaq was so impressed that he goes knocking down management's door before the draft and says, I want this guy. I've read a few accounts where he threatened to want to leave or go do something else if the Magic were to not take Anthony Penny Hardaway out of Memphis. So with that in mind, what they end up doing, the Magic, they take Chris Webber. And while they take Chris Webber, the Golden State Warriors had the third pick. Sean Bradley went second overall. Third pick was the Warriors. And the Warriors needed height. Webber would fit perfectly for them. They also moved up a little bit in the draft lottery too. So a little bit of a surprise from their end. So Don Nelson decides to get a big man and ends up trading Penny Hardaway, who they take, Anthony Penny Hardaway. They trade him to the Magic along with 3 first-round picks for the draft rights of Chris Webber. The announcement, stunning, amazing. People didn't know what to think. There was actually a watch party in Orlando. People were booing management, and management. Pat Williams is like, your jeers will become cheers. It's in that documentary. Literally says, your jeers will become cheers. They believe in Penny Hardaway. And Penny Hardaway fit better. The problem was a lot of the fans were just sold on not only Michigan's Fab Five, but big men. That's what it was. Got to get your big men. Got to get your big men. Slam dunks. You talk about slam dunks. Shaquille O'Neal made slam dunks cool. Did other people dunk before? Yes, but never with the force like Shaquille O'Neal. Breaking down baskets. Breaking baskets against the Phoenix Suns. Breaking baskets against the New Jersey Nets, where he pulled down everything in the shot clock with it. That was cool. People like to see that. He broke baskets, and that was something no one else really did. He dunked with authority. Dunks became stylish because of him. That's why. It went to a new level. And now you have Penny Hardaway, who can run with him, can feed him, has no problem. And just like that, when you look at the pace of play, still in the upper half, but then the offense ranks top 3. They were a top 3 offensive team Penny Hardaway's rookie year. Top 3. Absolutely incredible. So with Penny Hardaway on the team, this all-around guard, Scott Skiles tried to mentor him as best as can, but he didn't need it anymore. He and Shaq were very much connected by then. Very much connected. It's unbelievable that Penny Hardaway didn't win Rookie of the Year, because he was that good, and he made the Magic even deeper and also moving better, moving in a more organized fashion. 50 wins for the Orlando Magic in 1994. 50 wins. Problem is, they lacked playoff experience. They made the playoffs, but now they're going up against a team in Indiana that's been there before, that has more playoff experience, more veterans. And this became a theme of this team, unfortunately, because, look, you've got a team full of early 20s guys. You don't really have that veteran that's kind of keeping everything together. The ego's not getting out of control. The focus staying there. It's easy to lose focus when you're in your early 20s. And for those teenagers that are watching this, yes, it is. Let me tell you, a lot there, especially when you're a professional athlete. So they go up against the Indiana Pacers. They get swept out of the first round. They lose 3-0. This was back before 02-03, when first rounds were still best of 5 series. Okay, but they won 50 games. The Shaq and Penny effect. They needed more now. And did this give them enough to maybe attract somebody else that can be a key to this team? What happened during this time? Michael Jordan wasn't playing. No one knew when he was going to come back. When I was younger, Michael Jordan, when he retired, reading all of the biographies about him, all the articles, things he said, anyone that was a legit fan of Michael Jordan or knew anything about him, this is a guy that's motivated, will do anything to succeed. Thought when he was leaving for baseball, he wasn't coming back. And I wasn't the only one, because Horace Grant thought that too. And so the Magic add, now you're probably thinking, well, they could have had Shaq and Weber there, but Horace Grant was seasoned. Horace Grant wasn't just a banger in the low post. Nice mid-range guys that will actually help step up on defense at the elbow. That's how good Horace Grant was. Let's not forget with those 90s Bulls teams, it was just more than Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. They had a bunch of other players, John Paxson, B.J. Armstrong, Horace Grant, Stacey King, all these other guys that were like puzzle pieces. And when Michael Jordan learned to utilize his teammates correctly, that's when they became fierce. And that's when we saw the best of Horace Grant. Horace Grant was the perfect veteran to add to this team. And he ended up signing outright. And it says it in the documentaries too, that he actually was the first player to choose Orlando without getting drafted or anything like that. He chose to sign with the Orlando Magic. And this was very big because it gave the team legitimacy. He wasn't the only one. They get from, I don't want to say cross town, a few hours away, they get Brian Shaw as well. Another good veteran guard off the bench. Smart moves. Were these guys top of the tops? Horace Grant, pretty good in his position, played great defense. And when you have a fast-moving offense, you need to balance that out with a strong defense. And that's what bringing in Horace Grant did. And what you saw in 94-95, you saw this team crush it. Wins the division, 57 wins in this one. And also what you saw from Shaq and Penny, the further growth, everyone fell in love with it. Absolutely everyone. Shaq nearly won MVP, just missed out to David Robinson. Both he and Penny Hardaway were all-stars, and just watching them was appointment TV anytime they were on nationally. They moved fast, up and down the court. Penny Hardaway, a very solid passer, got through people. Very, I don't want to say Jason Williams, white chocolate-like, but still had a lot of spin to those passes too that got them inside. That's how good Penny Hardaway was, with strong court IQ and also size. And that helped the Magic having all of that size. So let's remember, going into the 1995 playoffs, you have no playoff wins under your belt for a series, but you've got all of these studs, and now you have seasoned players like Horace Grant in there to help keep things together. And what ends up happening is they win their first ever playoff series in 1995. They beat Boston. I believe they shut down the old Boston Garden by beating Boston in that series. I think it was a final series played in Boston Garden. Then they play the Bulls, and this was where the zenith, this was where it reached its highest point. Michael Jordan had come back in the 94-95 season, but he didn't play until March of 1995. So he's still shaking that rust like anyone that you haven't gone to the gym for a few years. Those first few workouts with weights, you're going to be feeling it the next few days. You got to be able to shake that rust to handle the physicality. And Michael Jordan, unfortunately, couldn't do that against the Orlando Magic. Plus, the Magic had a nice little former Bull on the team in Horace Grant that could tell him exactly how this team operates and to try to contain Michael Jordan. And in game one, especially, Nick Anderson causes the ball to get loose from Jordan. Penny Hardaway with the steal right to Horace Grant, slams it down. Jordan then turns it over with a bad pass to Scottie Pippen. The Magic end up winning game one. And that was, by the way, that was the whole famous 23 isn't 45. Nick Anderson shouldn't talk shit. You shouldn't be talking shit to Michael Jordan or to anyone for that matter. But Michael Jordan, you don't do that. And then, of course, Michael Jordan comes out with the 23, and that ended the era of the number 45, Michael Jordan. So then they win the series in 6 in Chicago. They have Horace Grant up on their shoulders and everything like that. That'll be a footnote coming up here in a few. Then they face the Pacers, who knocked them out in 94. They take them to 7. Very hard-fought series. Very physical teams, both of them. Indiana, very seasoned playoff team, like I said before. But in Game 7, Indiana just didn't show up. Orlando barely had to do anything. They played really well, but Orlando had that game. It seemed like from halftime on, you knew it was going to be Orlando. They win in 7, and they go on to the NBA Finals. In the NBA Finals, they face the defending champion Houston Rockets. Hakeem Olajuwon, another team that you've got guys that have been there before. The maturity factor now is tested for this young Orlando Magic team. And the Magic have home court advantage too. Game 1 of the finals, the Magic using the running ability, just jumping out to early leads, fast breaks. They were running the Rockets off the floor. You see Hakeem Olajuwon huffing and puffing. He's having such a tough time containing Shaq. And at halftime, you thought, wow, this Orlando team could do it. They really could. But then the second half comes, and the maturity of the Rockets set in. Better shots, Orlando's rushing shots. They're turning the ball over. They're playing soft. Again, lacking maturity and experience to do so. And Hakeem Olajuwon starts producing. Kenny Smith starts hitting threes. And even in the games that I watch now, when I see a player get hot from downtown, that should be the priority. Don't let him stay open for another 3 or 4 3-pointers. Get in his face. Kenny Smith got hot. End of the game, the Magic are clinging to a 3-point lead. Nick Anderson has a chance to ice the game. Misses 2 free throws. On the second free throw, the ball ricochets back to him, who's at the free throw line, gets fouled again. Now has an additional 2 free throws. All he's got to do is hit 1 to put Orlando up 4 and make it a 2-possession game with about 5 seconds to go. He misses both of them. Misses both free throws. Impacted Nick Anderson for the rest of his career. Free throws from that moment on haunted Nick Anderson. It changed things. It changed the momentum. It changed the emotions of this Magic team, going from very confident chest out to fear. Whoa, are we outmatched? Are we not? And before you know it, Kenny Smith off a curl hits a 3, ties it up. It goes to overtime. And then in overtime, Clyde Drexler gets the open lane. The Magic are late covering him. He flips it up in the air. And because of the late coverage, here's Hakeem Olajuwon waiting there under the basket to tip it right back in off the rim with about 0.3 of a second to go to give the Rockets the lead. They win the game. And then you just see the rest of that series. The Rockets just had them after that. Why? Because the Rockets, even bench players and some of their 6th, 7th men, were destroying Orlando. While Orlando was great offensively, they started to suffer defensively. And unfortunately for them, that was the end. They get swept out of the playoffs, which is a pattern for them. They get swept right out of the playoffs. And that was the end. Eastern Conference champs, no NBA championship. Rockets win their 2nd title in a row. The very next year, similar squad, same squad, trying to get back into it. They win 60 games. Not the 72 or anything like that Chicago won, but they win 60 games. And that is a very strong season for them. Didn't start out so strong, though. And that's because Shaq hurt himself. And that caused him, thumb injury caused him to miss the first 20-plus games. So now you got to see the Penny Hardaway show. And unfortunately, that's where the personalities between Shaq and Penny started to clash a little bit. There was shade thrown. There was a Reebok commercial that Shaq shot that made fun of Little Penny from Nike. So there were definitely shots. It was kind of a Cold War. Penny didn't talk to him. The locker room was getting divided because of the egos, apparently, and whatnot. And then it was, well, Shaq's a free agent at the end of the year. What's he going to do? The team wins 60 games, despite Shaq being out, which showed that Penny was legit and that maybe he could be a number 1 guy in case Shaq leaves. And they end up making it all the way to the conference finals, only to get swept by the Bulls. The Bulls were just kind of toying with them. Some of the games weren't as far off, but the Bulls were just a step ahead of Orlando every time. Orlando was being very careless with the ball, and you just saw this new Bulls team with Jordan Pittman. Now they got Dennis Rodman. I mean, that's a tough team to beat, and they got swept, the Orlando Magic. Let's talk about what happened in 1996. 60 wins. You just had back-to-back years, at least going to the conference finals. They went to the finals 2 years before. But Shaq sees that Alonzo Mourning got paid $100 million. Now, back in 1996, you weren't really seeing that just yet until that time. That summer was the birth of the $100 million contracts. Orlando offered Shaq a 4-year, $80 million deal, which Shaq kind of liked until he saw that Mourning was getting paid $100 million. So Shaq wanted to be the highest paid player naturally. And the old school Orlando Magic management couldn't fathom paying this guy, an athlete, just a singular player, $100 million because they're stupid. Stupid. Because Shaquille O'Neal is more than just a player. He's an entity. He's an attraction. He's a bigger attraction at that point than anything that Disney World has. You take Space Mountain and Frontierland, you put them together. You take the It's a Small World ride and Space Mountain, whatever you want to combine in there, Shaq is bigger than that. We all saw it. But the Orlando Magic management didn't see it. And then there was a poll in the paper in the summer of 1996 taking the civilians, do you want Shaq to leave or do you think that he's worth the money? And the poll showed that they thought these civilians and residents thought that he should leave. He should leave. They didn't realize what they have. And sometimes in life, you don't realize what you have until it's gone. And so Orlando, not able to really fathom, like I said, paying Shaq $100 million. Now the Lakers, you've got Jerry West wheeling and dealing, trading Vlade Divac, for draft capital, getting Kobe Bryant after that. But before that even happened, Shaq agrees to sign with the Lakers for over $110 million. Now, you read anything you want to read about Orlando or talk to anyone in the management group, they will tell you that they gave Shaq the bigger offer. Yeah, they did, but they waited too long because they kept Shaq in limbo for so long. When you feel like you're not wanted anymore, emotionally, you can't get there with that. You can't get there with the team anymore when you're feeling like they don't want you. You pay Shaq whatever the hell he wants. That's what you do. They drop the ball, and they have no titles. They dropped the ball with Shaquille O'Neal. He goes to the Lakers. Now, who do you replace Shaquille O'Neal with? No problem. Let's bring in Ronnie Cycli, right? Ronnie Cycli, not a bad scorer, pretty good rebounder. But is he Shaquille O'Neal? No, he's not Shaquille O'Neal. Not at all. Felton Spencer, he's not Shaquille O'Neal. Danny Shays, Derek Strong, none of these guys are Shaquille O'Neal. You can't even get away with flexing Horace Grant to the center spot. None of those guys are Shaq. They screwed it all up, and the unraveling began. 1997, they go from winning 60 games in 1996 to winning 45 games in 1997. By the way, that season, they also fired Brian Hill, who was their coach during this time, replaced Matt Guokas after the 92-93 season. Brian Hill comes in, brings this team to the NBA Finals, the conference finals, and then because of Penny Hardaway, the team turns on Brian Hill around All-Star break. So now he's fired. They make the playoffs. They lose. They go up 2-0, by the way, against the Heat in the first round in 97. And that would have been a major upset if they ended up winning that final game. But they lost Ronnie Cycli in the series. Go figure. And they end up losing 3 in a row and get bounced from the playoffs. And everything started unraveling further after that. Penny Hardaway, yeah, he's their number one guy and he's an all-star, but he hurt his knee. He barely played in 97, 98. They hired Chuck Daly, the old Bad Boys coach, who really brought good defense to this team. They just weren't the same team offensively anymore. They couldn't get out of the first round. 99 couldn't get out of the first round even with Chuck Daly there and Penny Hardaway who played. Then Penny Hardaway started to feel like he wasn't wanted anymore. And before you know it, the Magic decided not to give him a huge extension. The Phoenix Suns wanted to create what they called Backcourt 2000 with Penny Hardaway and Jason Kidd. In theory, that sounds freaking awesome. It ended up not really working out because of both players getting hurt. And before you know it, other pieces were sold. And that is where the Magic ended up falling into mediocrity, and they never got back. All because they didn't retain Shaq. And years later, when Shaq was inducted into their Hall of Fame, yeah, of course he's going to say that he wished he stayed in Orlando. He loved it there. He absolutely loved it there. But the management didn't show him the love at the right time. When you have a superstar, you make sure that superstar feels like a superstar. And now, like, oh, they're not worth $100 million. They didn't see it. We all saw it. We were watching it. But they let the economics, the business, cloud their judgment. And because of that, they lost this guy, number 32. They lost the opportunity to have a guy who could have ended up playing 15 plus years for them. Could have won a couple of titles. Before there was Shaq and Kobe. Always remember, there was Shaq and Penny first. See you freaks later.